When I refused to quit my job, my husband hit me with a vase, and then it happened again. I never thought it would come to this, not after everything we had been through together. But that day, the day my world shattered, I saw a side of my husband I'd never imagined. A side that still haunts me. It all started when my sister-in-law, his sister, showed up at our doorstep with her 3 kids, bags in hand, and a look on her face that told me she wasn't just here for a visit. Without a word of warning, she announced she was moving in, and that her brother, my husband, had agreed to it. Right then, I could feel something changing, like I wasn't part of this decision, like my life was about to be turned upside down. I had always been independent. I'd loved my job. It gave me purpose, a way to contribute to our household, and also have my own identity. But the moment his sister stepped in, that independence was threatened. My husband, the man I thought I knew, became someone else entirely. Suddenly, I was expected to take care of her children, manage the household, and give up my career. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. Quit your job, he said, with no room for negotiation. I refused. I couldn't just throw away everything I'd worked so hard for, just because he and his sister decided my role in life was to be their full-time caretaker. But my refusal only made things worse. At first, it was just anger in his voice, shouting, accusing me of being selfish. But then, that anger turned into something darker, something violent. In a moment I'll never forget, he grabbed the vase from the coffee table and swung it at me. I didn't see it coming. The vase shattered against my head, and in that split second, my entire life seemed to crack open along with it. I could barely process the pain. All I could feel was disbelief. The man I had built my life with, the man who was supposed to protect me, had just attacked me in a fit of rage. But what came next, what I did next, that's the part of the story you won't want to miss. Because from that moment on, I knew I had to fight back. And what I did left him trembling with fear. Background story. To understand how it all came to this, you need to know what things were like before. When we first got married, everything seemed fine. My husband, Mark, was supportive, kind, and even encouraging about my job. He used to tell me how proud he was that I worked hard, that I was ambitious. But slowly, things started to change. At first, it was little things. He'd make comments about me spending too much time at the office or ask why I couldn't be home earlier to make dinner. I brushed it off. I thought it was normal for couples to have these little disagreements. But over time, his comments became more frequent, more controlling. He started making it seem like I was choosing my job over our family, even though we didn't have kids yet. It confused me, but I tried to make it work. Then came his sister. Now, Mark's relationship with his sister was complicated. They were close, too close if you ask me. She had always leaned on him, even when it seemed like she was taking advantage of his generosity. She would call, needing help with money, asking for favors, and Mark would always drop everything to help her. I didn't mind at first, but when it became a regular thing, I started to feel uncomfortable. I remember the day clearly when she showed up at our door. She didn't call ahead, didn't ask if it was okay. She just appeared with her 3 kids in tow, as if we were running some kind of shelter. Her excuse: her husband had left her, and she had nowhere else to go. My first thought was to sympathize. I mean, what kind of person would turn away their own family in a moment of need, right? But deep down, I knew this wasn't temporary. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. The moment she stepped through our door, the dynamics in our home changed. It wasn't our house anymore. It was hers. She made herself comfortable, spread her stuff all over the place. And within days, it felt like I was the outsider. Mark, of course, didn't see it that way. To him, she was his sister and I was overreacting. We have to help her, he'd say, as if I didn't know that. But I could sense this wasn't just about helping her. There was something more, something that made him feel like I wasn't his priority anymore. That's when the real pressure started. He wanted me to quit my job, stay home, and look after her kids. I couldn't believe it at first. Why should I give up my career, something I loved, just to cater to her needs? It made no sense. But to him, it was simple. Family came first. But in his version of family, I wasn't really included. I was expected to fall in line, do what I was told, and somehow sacrifice everything I built just to take care of his sister and her children. I wasn't having it. I tried to talk to him, to reason with him, but every conversation ended the same way, with him getting angry. He'd accuse me of being selfish, of not caring about family, of putting my career above everyone else. But that wasn't true. I just wanted balance. I didn't want to be trapped in a life where I had no say. But Mark didn't see it that way. To him, there was no compromise. It was his way or nothing. Escalating conflict. Things went downhill fast after my sister-in-law moved in. Every day felt like a battle I didn't sign up for. It wasn't just the noise, the constant demands, or the mess she and her kids left behind. It was how I felt like I didn't belong in my own home anymore. My husband, Mark, had sided with her completely. If I said anything, even the smallest complaint, he'd shoot me a look as if I was the problem. And when I told him I wouldn't quit my job, that's when the real fights began. I tried to keep it together. I kept going to work, hoping things would settle down, that he'd come around and understand that I wasn't being selfish, that I just wanted my life to have balance. But every day I came home, it got worse. His sister had taken over the house, and I was left feeling like a stranger. I had no space, no peace, and it seemed like everything I did was wrong in their eyes. I started to dread coming home. The arguments with Mark started happening more frequently. He'd come home from work, and the moment I walked in the door, I could feel the tension in the air. "Did you think about what I said?" he'd ask, his voice sharp, cutting. He was talking about me quitting my job again. Every time I said no, and every time he got more and more frustrated. I wasn't going to give in. My job was part of who I was, and I couldn't let it go just because things had gotten hard at home. One night, things got really bad. We were sitting at the dinner table, me, Mark, his sister, and her kids. It was noisy as usual, and I was already exhausted from work. That's when Mark brought it up again in front of everyone. He asked me loudly when I was going to quit my job to stay home and take care of the family. I remember my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to fight in front of the kids, but I couldn't just sit there and stay quiet. I told him, firmly but calmly, that I wasn't going to quit, that I had worked too hard to get where I was, and that I wouldn't give it up, no matter how much pressure he put on me. I was done with the constant demands, the guilt-tripping, the feeling that my life no longer belonged to me. But the moment those words left my mouth, I knew it wasn't over. He snapped. I saw his face twist with anger. He slammed his hand on the table so hard that the plates rattled. His sister looked down, pretending she didn't see anything, but I could feel her satisfaction. She had been waiting for this, waiting for me to finally crack under the pressure. But I didn't crack. I stayed calm, even though inside I was shaking. That's when Mark stood up. He towered over me, his fists clenched. I knew he was furious, but I still didn't expect what happened next. He walked over to the coffee table, grabbed the vase, and in one quick motion, swung it at my head. I barely had time to react before it smashed against me. The sound of it shattering was so loud, but all I could feel was the pain and shock. My head throbbed, and I stumbled back, trying to understand what had just happened. The room went silent. Even the kids stopped talking. Mark didn't say a word. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his face red with anger. I'd looked at him, and all I could think was, how did it come to this? How did the man I married, the man I trusted, do something like this? I should have run right then. I should have grabbed my things and left. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was too stunned, too hurt. And deep down, I was still trying to make sense of it all, still trying to hold on to some hope that this wasn't real, that maybe, somehow, this could be fixed. But something inside me broke that night. As I sat there, holding my head in my hands, blood trickling down my face, I knew I had reached my breaking point. This wasn't just about the vase. This wasn't just about the physical pain. It was about all the little things that had led up to this moment, the manipulation, the control, the emotional abuse. And now, finally, it had become physical. I stood up slowly, dizzy from the blow. Mark didn't try to help me. He didn't apologize. He didn't even seem to care that he had just hit me. And that's when I knew I had to leave. I had to get out of there before things got worse. But this wasn't going to end the way he thought. I wasn't going to just leave quietly. I had a plan. The turning point. That night, after the vase shattered, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just hurt, physically or emotionally. I was angry, angrier than I'd ever been. But it wasn't the kind of anger that makes you scream or lash out. It was the kind that makes you cold, calm, and calculating. I knew that if I stayed, it would only get worse. I couldn't let that happen. I had to leave, but I wasn't going to leave quietly. Not after everything. I spent the next few hours in a haze. My head was still throbbing from where the vase hit me, but I didn't let that stop me. While Mark slept, I packed a bag. I moved quietly, making sure not to wake him. I didn't want a confrontation. Not yet. There was a part of me that still couldn't believe what had happened, that still couldn't believe this was real life. But another part of me, maybe the stronger part, knew it was time to go. I packed just the essentials, some clothes, my wallet, my keys, and my phone. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get out of that house. I had to get away from Mark, from his sister, from everything that had taken over my life. But before I left, I needed to do something that would make him realize he couldn't just walk all over me. I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where we kept important papers. Our marriage certificate, our joint bank account statements, all the documents that tied me to him. I took them out and laid them on the kitchen table. Then one by one, I started ripping them up. It felt good, really good, to destroy those pieces of paper that had once meant so much. It felt like I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece. But that wasn't enough. I needed to leave something behind that would really get to him. Something that would make him stop in his tracks. I thought about all the times he had controlled me, manipulated me, and then finally hit me. I thought about how he expected me to just take it, to stay in that house and play the role he wanted me to play. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't going to let him have the last word. I grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I wrote him a note. It wasn't long, just a few sentences, but every word was carefully chosen. I told him that I was leaving, that I wasn't coming back, and that by the time he woke up, I'd be gone. I told him that he'd regret what he did, but not in the way he might think. I told him that from now on, he wouldn't control me or anything else in his life. I left the note on top of the torn-up papers. I wanted him to see them both at the same time, to understand that our marriage, our life together, was over. But more than that, I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions. I wanted him to realize that by trying to control me, he had lost me. And that's something he could never take back. I stood there for a moment just looking at the mess I'd made on the table. It was symbolic in a way. My life had been a mess for so long, and now I was finally starting to clean it up. It wasn't easy. I knew that walking out the door would be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But I also knew it was the only thing I could do. I picked up my bag, slipped my shoes on, and quietly opened the front door. The night air hit my face, cold and sharp, but it felt good. It felt like freedom. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't weighed down by fear or guilt. I was finally doing what I needed to do for myself. I walked down the street, not really knowing where I was headed, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that house, from the life that had been suffocating me. I felt lighter with every step I took. It was as if with each step, I was shedding a layer of pain, a layer of control that had been wrapped around me for so long. But my story doesn't end there. You see, when Mark woke up the next morning, he wasn't just faced with the mess I left behind. He was faced with something far more terrifying. I wasn't there to see it, but I can imagine the look on his face when he walked into the kitchen and saw what I'd done. The torn-up papers, the note, it was all meant to send a message. But that wasn't the only surprise waiting for him. Before I left, I had taken something from him. Something that meant more to him than I ever did, his control over me. And I knew deep down that without that control, he would crumble. I could picture him standing there, his hands shaking, his eyes scanning the room, realizing that I was gone, and that his power over me had disappeared with me. He thought he could control me. He thought he could break me. But he was wrong. I had walked away, and in doing so, I had taken back everything he had tried to steal from me. And that, more than anything, was the revenge I had been waiting for. It wasn't about hurting him the way he had hurt me. It wasn't about getting even. It was about showing him, and showing myself, that I was stronger than he ever gave me credit for. That I could survive without him. That I could thrive without him. I never looked back. I didn't need to, because from that moment on I was free. The revenge plan. Walking away from that house was the first step, but I knew that leaving wasn't enough. It wasn't enough just to get out. I had to make sure that Mark understood what he had done, that he truly felt the consequences of his actions. I wasn't looking for violence or some dramatic confrontation. My revenge would be quieter but no less powerful. I wanted to shake him to his core the way he had shaken me. I found a place to stay that night. It wasn't much, just a cheap motel room on the edge of town, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my revenge wasn't about making Mark pay in some big, flashy way. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and showing him that I wasn't his to control anymore. The next day, I made some calls. First, I contacted a lawyer. I didn't want to waste time. I wanted everything set in motion as quickly as possible. I explained the situation, and the lawyer told me I had grounds for both a divorce and a restraining order. Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For so long, I had been trapped in that house, in that marriage, and now, finally, I had a way out. But there was more to be done. Mark had always been proud of his reputation. He worked in a small, close-knit office where everyone knew everyone. He liked to think of himself as the perfect family man, the kind of guy who had it all together. But behind closed doors, the truth was very different. I decided that it was time for the truth to come out. I reached out to a few people who worked with him. It wasn't hard. These were people I'd met at office parties, people who had seen us together, who had always praised us as the perfect couple. I wasn't looking for sympathy, but I wanted them to know the truth about who Mark really was. So I told them. I told them about the control, the manipulation, and how it had all escalated to violence. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. By the end of the day, word had started to spread. I didn't have to say much. In a small office like his, gossip spreads like wildfire. I could only imagine the looks on their faces when they realized the truth about the man they thought they knew. And while I didn't know exactly what Mark's reaction was, I could guess. I knew it would hit him where it hurt the most. His image, his pride. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I closed the joint bank account. I took half of the money, my half, and moved it into a new account with only my name on it. I didn't feel guilty about it. That money was just as much mine as it was his, and I wasn't going to leave him with the power to control me financially. With every step I took, I was reclaiming parts of my life that he had tried to take away. I also started documenting everything. I knew that the legal process could get messy, and I wasn't about to let Mark twist the story to make himself look like the victim. I kept records of everything, the fights, the threats, even the Vase incident. I wanted to be ready for whatever he tried to throw at me, because I knew him well enough to know that he wouldn't go down quietly. But here's the thing. My revenge wasn't just about hurting him. It was about freeing myself. Every action I took wasn't just to make him feel the consequences of what he'd done, but to take back control over my own life. For so long, I had let him dictate everything. How I should act, what I should do, even what I should feel. But not anymore. I started making plans for the future, my future, not ours. I knew that I was going to leave him behind, and that meant building a life that didn't revolve around him anymore. I looked into getting my own place, something small but comfortable, a place that felt like mine. And I kept going to work. That was important to me. My job was my independence, the one thing Mark had tried to take away from me, and I wasn't about to give it up now. The more I took these steps, the more I realized that my revenge wasn't just about Mark. It was about me. It was about showing myself that I was stronger than I had ever believed, that I didn't need him, or anyone else, to define who I was, that I could rebuild my life on my own terms. I didn't need to confront Mark directly to get my revenge. I didn't need to scream or make a scene. My actions, the choices I made to rebuild my life without him, were enough. I knew that once he realized what I had done, the divorce, the restraining order, the truth spreading through his workplace, he would feel the full weight of his actions. He would realize that in trying to control me, he had lost everything. But for me, revenge wasn't about making him suffer. It was about finding my own way forward, free from his control, free from the fear and manipulation that had held me back for so long. And in the end, that was the best revenge of all. Husband's realization. I wasn't there to see it happen, but I can imagine the exact moment Mark realized everything had changed. He would have woken up groggy and irritable as usual, expecting me to be somewhere in the house. Maybe he'd have called my name or expected breakfast to be waiting like nothing had happened the night before. But instead, he would have found the empty house, the silence so heavy it must have felt suffocating. And then he would have walked into the kitchen. There, in the middle of the table, he would have seen the torn-up marriage certificate, the ripped bank statements, and the note I left for him. I pictured the way his hands must have shook when he picked it up, his eyes scanning the words, slowly realizing that I was gone. That I wasn't coming back. That everything he had taken for granted was falling apart. I didn't need to be there to know what came next. Mark had always been predictable. He'd try to control the situation, to fix things the way he always did, by trying to reassert his dominance. Maybe he would have stormed out of the house, trying to track me down. Maybe he thought he could call my phone and convince me to come back. But I wasn't answering, and I wasn't coming back. Not this time. The first call I did receive was from his sister. That didn't surprise me either. She was furious, of course, her voice screeching through the phone, demanding to know what I had done, accusing me of abandoning the family. To her, it was simple. I was supposed to stay, to give up everything for her and her children. But she had no power over me anymore. I didn't need to explain myself to her. I hung up before she could finish, because her words didn't matter anymore. I was done being the one who was made to feel small, the one who was always expected to sacrifice. I imagined the panic in Mark's eyes when he realized I had closed the joint account, that I had taken my half of the money and left him with nothing but his pride and his anger. He had always been so careful with money, so controlling of every little thing. I knew it would shake him to his core, that feeling of losing control, of not being able to fix this with a simple command or demand. But he didn't understand yet that this was bigger than just the money or the marriage. The next day I started hearing from mutual friends. Some were shocked, others confused. Mark had been calling them, trying to spin the story, telling them how I had abandoned him and ruined everything. But the truth was starting to seep out bit by bit. I hadn't needed to shout or spread rumors. Just a few quiet conversations, the right words to the right people, and the truth began to surface. It didn't take long for people to put the pieces together. The perfect husband, the perfect life that Mark had worked so hard to project, was unraveling in front of everyone's eyes. People at his job started noticing the cracks in his demeanor, the way he seemed more agitated, more on edge. The gossip spread like wildfire, And while I wasn't there to see it, I knew that it was eating him up inside. His reputation was his most valuable possession. More than money, more than our marriage, Mark had always cared about how he looked in front of others. To him, being respected, being seen as the man in charge, was everything. But now people were starting to see the real Mark, the controlling, manipulative, and angry man behind the facade. And that was something he couldn't control. Not anymore. I didn't need to destroy him with grand gestures or confrontations. The truth did the work for me. The more people found out, the more Mark was forced to face the reality of what he had done. I knew he would try to twist the story, to make himself look like the victim, but the evidence was there, and I had made sure of that. The lawyer had everything, my documentation of the abuse, the witnesses who had seen the changes in me over the years, even the hospital records from the Vase incident. There was no escaping the truth now. In the days that followed, I heard less and less from him. It was as if he had realized there was no point in trying to fight back, no point in trying to salvage what was already lost. The silence was its own kind of satisfaction, knowing that he was sitting in that empty house, alone, with nothing but his shattered pride and the pieces of his life crumbling around him. The final blow came when the divorce papers were served. I knew that would be the moment he finally realized it was over. Not just the marriage, but everything, the control, the manipulation, the power he thought he had over me. It was gone. And that, more than anything, was what he couldn't stand. People always talk about revenge like it's something violent, something angry. But for me, revenge wasn't about causing him pain or getting even. It was about freedom. It was about showing him, and showing myself, that I could walk away, that I could live without him, that I was stronger than he ever thought I was. In the end, Mark wasn't left with bruises or scars, but with something much deeper. He was left with the realization that he had lost control, that the life he had tried to build on lies and manipulation was crumbling around him. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The aftermath. After the divorce papers were served and everything was finally out in the open, I felt like I could finally breathe again. It was strange at first, being on my own. There were moments when I'd wake up in the middle of the night, expecting to hear Mark's voice or the chaos from his sister's kids in the house. But instead there was silence, peaceful, calm silence. I moved into a small apartment not far from where I worked. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every time I walked through that door, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was like stepping into a new life, one where I was in control. No more walking on eggshells, no more constant demands. Just me, my space, and the freedom to live how I wanted. At first, it was hard. After years of being told who I was supposed to be, it felt strange to make decisions without hearing someone else's voice in my head. Simple things like deciding what to eat for dinner or how to spend my weekend suddenly felt like these big, overwhelming choices. But over time, I started to enjoy it. The freedom, the independence. It was everything I had been missing for so long. I kept going to work, of course. My job had always been my escape, the one place where I felt valued and respected for who I was, not for what I could do for someone else. And now it was more than just an escape. It was a way to build my future, a future that didn't revolve around anyone else's needs but my own. Every day, I felt more confident, more sure of myself. It was like I was rediscovering who I had been before everything with Mark started. I also started seeing a therapist. I didn't realize just how much I had been carrying with me until I started talking to someone. All the anger, the fear, the guilt. It was all still there, just buried under the surface. But little by little, I worked through it. I started to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were days when it felt like I hadn't made any progress at all. But I kept going, because I knew that if I didn't face it, I'd never really be free. One of the hardest parts was learning to trust again. After years of being manipulated and controlled, it was difficult to let anyone get close to me. I had built walls around myself, and I wasn't ready to let anyone in just yet. But that was okay. I needed time, and I gave myself permission to take it. I wasn't in a rush to find someone new or fill the empty spaces in my life. For the first time, I was content being on my own. As the months went by, I started to feel more at peace with everything that had happened. I realized that while what Mark did to me was horrible, it didn't define me. I wasn't just the woman who had been hit with a vase, or the woman who had been manipulated into nearly giving up her life. I was stronger than that. I had survived, and not just survived, I had thrived. There were moments when I'd think about Mark, about the life we had before everything went wrong. I wondered if he had changed, if he had learned anything from what happened. But those thoughts didn't stay with me long. They weren't important anymore. What mattered was that I had walked away, and that I had built a life for myself, one that I was proud of. I never spoke to him again after the divorce. There was no need. Our lives had completely diverged, and there was no going back. And that was the best part. There was no part of me that wanted to go back. No lingering feelings, no what-ifs, just the certainty that leaving was the best decision I had ever made. Looking back now, I realize that my story isn't just about revenge or escape. It's about finding strength when you don't even know you have it. It's about reclaiming your life, your dignity, and your worth after someone else tries to take it from you. It's about healing, not for anyone else, but for yourself. There are so many women out there who are still trapped, who feel like they can't leave, who feel like they don't deserve better. To them, I want to say, you do deserve better. You deserve a life where you are valued and respected, a life where you are in control. And it's possible. It's hard, and it's terrifying, but it's possible. Leaving Mark wasn't just about saving myself from him. It was about giving myself the chance to live the life I was always meant to live, free, independent, and unapologetically me. And that, more than anything, is the best kind of revenge. Conclusion. As I look back on everything that happened, I realize that my story isn't unique. There are countless people, mostly women, who are trapped in situations where they feel powerless, where their voices are silenced, and their lives are controlled by someone else. And if my story can reach just one of them, if it can make them see that there is a way out, then it was worth telling. Leaving Mark wasn't easy. It wasn't just about walking out the door. It was about finding the strength to stand up for myself, to demand the respect and freedom that I deserved. And that strength didn't come from revenge, or from hurting him the way he hurt me. It came from realizing that I had the power to choose my own path, to live a life that was entirely my own. There were times when I doubted myself, when I thought that maybe I had made the wrong decision. After all, Mark and I had shared years together. We had built a life, or at least what seemed like a life. But looking back, I see that it wasn't a life at all. It was a cage built from control, manipulation, and fear. And now that I'm free, I can't imagine ever going back. The most important thing I've learned from all of this is that true strength doesn't come from fighting back or from trying to win. It comes from walking away. It comes from choosing yourself. It comes from knowing that you deserve better, and from having the courage to take the steps to make that happen. That's the message I want to leave with you today. If you're in a situation like the one I was in, if you feel like your life isn't your own, if you're constantly being told that you're not enough, or that you have to sacrifice your happiness for someone else, know this: you're enough. You deserve happiness, freedom, and respect. And there is a way out. It might be hard, and it might take time, but it is possible. I hope my story shows that there is light at the end of the tunnel. That no matter how trapped or hopeless you feel, there is always a way to reclaim your life. It won't happen overnight, and it won't be easy. But every step you take towards freedom is worth it. If you or someone you know is in a similar situation, please reach out for help. There are people who will support you, who will listen, and who will guide you to safety. You don't have to go through it alone. Thank you for watching my story. If it resonated with you, or if you know someone who could benefit from hearing it, please share this video. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this one. And remember, you have the power to change your life. You have the power to choose freedom.